So after Bill Maher's show has continued to decay over the years and he increasingly becomes more and more conservative and panders to right-wingers, he finally did something that appeased progressives. Or rather, I should say, he had an episode that aired that didn't piss off all progressives. And he did this by actually bringing on a progressive, Bernie Sanders. And it was really encouraging to see Bill Maher's audience cheer on Bernie Sanders so loudly. And I was happy to hear Bill Maher himself say he'd support Bernie Sanders if he did, in fact, decide to run in 2020. So it was actually, I think, a pretty solid show for the first time in a long time. I can't remember the last time I watched Bill Maher and didn't just hate his face while watching it, but this time it was pretty good. So Bernie Sanders was talking to Bill Maher about what Democrats specifically can do to defeat Trumpism.
It is not good enough to simply attack Trump every single day. What we need to do is bring forth an agenda that working people all over this country are going to respond to. And let me be very clear, and I've said it before. In 2016, it's not that Trump won, it's that Democrats lost. And for too long, the Democratic Party has been dominated by wealthy campaign contributors. They got to open the door to people who work with their hands, people who take showers at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day. Open the door to young people. And we have a generation out there of some of the brightest, most decent young people in the history of this country. Beautiful young people. And what we have to do, Bill, let's not forget this. 4 years ago in 2014, we had the lowest voter turnout for a midterm election since World War II. 37% of the people voted. If we increase that voter turnout by 50%, Democrats win the House, win the Senate. And that's what we have to do.
Okay, right. So you mentioned the Democrats lost last time. But your agenda won. You may not have won the nomination,
right?
But you talk about an agenda. They're all behind that now.
Yes.
I mean, Medicare for all.
Yep.
All the people who are running for president, we kind of know who they are. And income inequality, all those issues.
So Bernie's overall point is 100% true. You can't just be anti-Trump. You've got to be unapologetically progressive and put forward a platform that will actually excite your base and thus increase voter turnout. And what I like is that an establishment figurehead like Bill Maher actually acknowledged that Bernie Sanders is the one setting the bar for 2020. Bernie is the one that essentially forced other Democrats like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, all to acquiesce behind Bernie Sanders' agenda. And for someone like Bill Maher to admit that, I do think it's a really big deal because he's giving Bernie Sanders credit where other establishment figures and establishment loyalists like Bill Maher generally don't do that. So it's important that Bill Maher said this and acknowledged the truth about how Bernie Sanders is still influencing other presidential contenders and individuals within the Democratic Party because they need to hear this. And it coming from Bill Maher, I think, is really important. But Bill Maher did push back against Bernie, and I think that him pressing Bernie was justified because he asked Bernie how you take basically an agenda and turn that into effective messaging to compete with Republicans who generally are really good at getting the message out there and galvanizing their own base. And I think Bernie's answer, again, was pretty impressive.
An agenda is not a message. They are different. Trump is better at messaging. His voters don't seem to care about an agenda or anything except build a wall, lock her up. What's the Democrats' message? If you had to boil it down to something that would fit on a hat, which is about all people can take in at this point, what is the Democratic message?
The Democratic message is that we need a government that represents working families, not billionaires. An agenda that says that health care is a right, not a privilege. An agenda that speaks to the young people and says that we should make public colleges and universities tuition-free and lower student debt. That's an agenda that wins.
But Trump has shown that the American people, they elected him. I understand he didn't win the popular vote, but he got a lot of votes. And so and his popularity rating keeps going up, not down.
Yeah.
It's almost in the range of like a normal president, which is really scary because he certainly is not that. So they obviously don't care about so many things they used to care about, like decorum or policy or democracy or freedom of the press. So in this new arena, and he is brilliant at controlling the debate and controlling airtime. What does a Democrat have to do to compete on this new stage? It is a new stage.
That's a fair point, and the airtime issue is very difficult. You know, people say, why aren't the Democrats talking about issues? Well, you know what? In many cases, Democrats are, but we're overwhelmed with Trump's tweets and the absurdity of the day. So I think what Democrats have got to do, basically, is go into Trump country and talk to people who are now living in desperation. You know, the truth of the matter is, one of the reasons, in my view, that Trump won is that he sensed that there were millions of people in this country who were ignored by the political establishment. They're ignored by the elite. They're working longer hours for lower wages. They're scared to death about the future facing their children. And he said, and he lied, I hear you. Our job is not to lie, to have the guts to deal with the serious issues that they face and to take on the people who have power in this country.
So I think that Bill Maher is both right and wrong here. He's right in that Republicans, nobody can deny the fact that they are very effective at messaging. If they say something, they repeat it over and over and over, and suddenly people just regurgitate it as fact. So Republicans are good at messaging, but Bill Maher is wrong in saying that the Democratic Party's base doesn't care about policies. They do care about policies. The problem is that the Democratic Party doesn't ever talk about policies. They simply regurgitate the same platitudes over and over again, and when they talk about things, it's never about policy substance. So for example, Tom Perez, the DNC chairman, one of the leaders of the Democratic Party, when he's talking about healthcare, he likes to say that healthcare is a right and not a privilege. And now a lot of Democrats are saying this, but when you ask them if they support laws like Medicare for All that would make healthcare an actual right and not a privilege, well, they say no. They do this tap dance around the question. So they like to espouse platitudes and not say anything meaningful. But if you actually give the base real concrete policies, they'll come out and support you. And the reason why Trump had the upper hand in 2016 also was because the media gave him $2 billion in free coverage. Regardless if that coverage was negative or not, the mere fact that they were covering him that much legitimized his campaign and made him seem like a credible candidate. And it also helped to get his message out there more. But Bernie's solution here is to talk to people, subvert the media altogether. And it's a way to bypass their bias and reach voters in a more direct manner. And really, this is what the grassroots is all about. It lets voters know you care enough to actually go to them and talk with them. And clearly, what Bernie Sanders is doing is working. He's going to Trump country. He's going to the areas of the country where voters felt like they were forgotten about, not just by Republicans, but by the Democratic Party as well. And he's letting them know that he cares about them and that their policy preferences are important. They matter. Because what they want, by and large, is what all Americans want. And, what he's doing is working because he's the most popular politician in the country by a mile. So I really thought that this was a great interview by Bill Maher. It was the first time, again, that I watched Bill Maher where I didn't come away completely pissed with my day ruined, wanted to rant. Kudos to Bill Maher. This is a step in the right direction. One thing that I will say to Bill Maher is that if you truly do care about Bernie Sanders and support his campaign, don't do what you did in 2016 in 2020, because he basically talked about Bernie Sanders as if he had no chance of winning. I remember during a particular overtime segment, somebody asked, if Bernie Sanders could win Iowa and New Hampshire, does he have a chance? And he said, no, he still doesn't have a chance. So, the way that Bill Maher described Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign was as if it was meaningless and you should have just lined up behind Hillary Clinton, and he misread the political climate at that time. And now he's realizing that he was wrong. But Bill, you're still wrong about a lot of things. And you need to actually talk to average Americans, not just rich elites that you bring on your program actually talk to people and see what they're thinking with regard to politics.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.